Welcome to E Squared Emporium for all things AP Psychology. Today we're talking about Part 2, Operant Conditioning. So operant conditioning is a learning process where the likelihood that a behavior will be increased or decreased happens through reward and punishment. So classical conditioning, what we talked about before, is a passive association. You make the association between two things. But in operant conditioning, the focus is on voluntary behavior based on not wanting the consequence or based on wanting the reward. You actually will do the behavior or stop doing the behavior. So in operant conditioning, that is how learning happens, consequences and rewards. We will talk about Thorndike and B.F. Skinner. An example of this might be that you have the fastest time in a swim meet, and that's a behavior that's going to be reinforced with a medal and a lot of praise. And that means you're more likely to get a faster time in the future and continue with that sport. Same way that with our dog getting a treat, that is going to ensure that that behavior continues. Same thing here with how we would train animals for the circus. So you would receive food and it would strengthen the behavior of having the ball in your nose. So Edward Thorndike came up with the term law of effect based on his studies, which we will talk about. This is also known as instrumental learning and based on his work in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So Thorndike's law of effect states that behaviors that we encourage will continue on if they are followed by something satisfactory, a reward of some kind. Behaviors that we want to discourage, they will go away if there are annoying consequences or punishments or things that you don't want. So his early research was with cats in a puzzle box. So the cats had to learn to escape the puzzle box by stepping on a lever that was inside the box, and that would unlatch the door. Now, these cats tried everything. They tried meowing and chewing and all kinds of things. And sometimes they accidentally stepped on the lever, but they would eventually learn that that was the way that they could get out. And if they escaped, they could have a fish. So getting out of the box and getting the fish strengthened the behavior of cats learning how to escape the puzzle box. But all the other behaviors that they did just kept them confined in the box, and eventually those were weakened. So any reinforcement is something that increases a behavior or strengthens the continuation of that behavior. So a stimulus that increases the likelihood of a desired behavior. Now, these can be positive or negative, and whether it's positive or negative kind of depends on the learner's point of view. It might be something that your teacher thinks is great and you think is a terrible idea. So it could be negative to one person and positive to another person. So let's start with positive reinforcements. So we're going to add something. Think of the plus sign, positive. We're going to add something that is desirable to continue or strengthen the behavior. The addition of something pleasant. Most often it's food when we're talking about animals. So for example, a child picks up his room, picks up his toys, puts them away. That's a behavior. And now you've been given praise. So the child is more likely to pick up the toys or the room in the future. Or a person performs well at their job, that's their behavior, and then they receive a paycheck, or maybe they get a bonus, that's the stimulus. That's positive reinforcement. That leads to the likelihood that they will continue to do a good job in the future. So negative reinforcement isn't necessarily negative. It doesn't mean a bad thing. It just means something is being taken away or removed. So think of it as a minus sign. So negative reinforcement, we're going to remove something that was undesirable that you didn't want in the first place, and that's going to strengthen your behavior. So when a behavior prevents or removes an aversive or undesired stimulus. So for example, a child takes out the garbage, that's their behavior, and the mother stops nagging, right? Stops telling them to take the trash out. Well, that is removing something the child did not want to have anymore. So that is a negative reinforcement. If you find that changing a baby's diaper, which is a behavior, stops the crying of the baby, then the next time the baby cries, you'll be more likely, more willing to change the baby's diaper because it took away the crying. So there's two other forms of negative reinforcement. We don't really have to know the distinction between these, but you might see them in your book. Escape occurs also, it's a negative reinforcement. You're trying to get away from it, so it does remove it. So for instance, you can escape a headache by taking an aspirin, and avoiding is similar, but we don't want to deal with whatever it is. So the behavior happens in the presence of a signal that informs the person or the animal that something you don't want is likely. So for instance, if you always get indigestion every time you eat something spicy, this time you could take an antacid before you eat something spicy, and then you shouldn't have that thing that you're avoiding that you don't want to have, like a stomachache. So let's jump into punishment. So punishment is very similar, but there's a positive and a negative for punishment. Sometimes they look similar. We have to be really clear on the distinction. So any event that follows a response would weaken it if it's something that you don't want, right? So aversive conditioning, something that, whether it's positive adding a punishment or negative taking away something as a punishment, you don't want it. So punishment is most effective when it is intense, so pretty big, and it should occur immediately after the behavior, like within a half second to 3 seconds. It needs to occur very quickly. You don't want a punishment for something you did last Tuesday or 3 months ago. So it may only produce a temporary suspension of the behavior, and then that behavior may come back again with punishment. And again, it can be positive or negative, and it's the learner that determines if what is happening to them is positive or negative. So positive punishment, just like we said before, is adding. You are adding something that the person or the animal did not want, and that will decrease the probability of that behavior repeating. So it makes the behavior less likely to occur. Like if a child is pulling on the dog's tail, that's a behavior, and then has their hand slapped, well, that is something positive. It's a positive punishment, and they will be less likely to pull on the dog's tail again. So the cat is scratching the couch, that's a behavior, and the cat is sprayed with water, that's adding something. The cat will be less likely to scratch the couch in the future. So if you are going to be punished or yelled at or grounded for breaking curfew, that's something being added. Being spanked, that's something being added. Receiving a speeding ticket, that is something being added. Negative punishment is removing something you really wanted. In this case, it's something you did really want, and it's going to get taken away from you in order to also decrease the probability of you doing that behavior again. So now a child is grabbing, snatching a toy from their sibling. That's a behavior. And so the parent is going to deny that child access to, say, the television or the computer or something that they want. So your punishment is that you lose time doing something that you want. It's taken away. So maybe you were driving under the influence of alcohol. That's a behavior. And then a person loses their license. So that's negative. Something's being taken away from you. You were in too late. You broke curfew, and now your phone has been taken away. So that's a negative punishment. Or you've been grounded for your grades. That's a negative punishment. So there we go. Car keys getting taken away. And this chart really kind of explains everything that we just went over, the positive and the negative reinforcement and the positive and the negative punishment. Now we can generalize with reinforcements as well. It is the ability to perform a task in new situations, something that you've been trained in a specific context. So let's say you have been rewarded for raising your hand in class when you're in elementary school. And now you raise your hand at all your activities. You raise your hand in church, you raise your hand at home, you raise your hand at the zoo, you raise your hand in sports, you raise your hand everywhere because you have generalized that that behavior is a good behavior. Another one is a child who learns to use zippers, zipping up a jacket, zipping up a backpack. Now they have generalized. And you received like positive praise the first time you were able to do it by yourself. And so now you are generalizing this to all zippers. And discrimination is now the ability to distinguish between the stimuli and in which situation would you get reinforced. So raising your hand at school will probably get you reinforced. Raising your hand at home will probably not get you the same praise or reinforcement. So you might answer only your best friend's special tone on the phone, but you don't answer the general ringtone on your phone. You might react differently to the microwave, but not the dishwasher, because the microwave has your treats in it, something you were heating up, some food you were hoping for, a snack. And so you'll react differently to it. You can discriminate because it has a better reward. The dishwasher doesn't really have the same reward. So a dog can discriminate, for instance, between the gesture for sit and the gesture for stay, and they know they're only going to get a treat for the one you're specifically asking for at that time. So there are types of reinforcers. There are two main types, primary and secondary. So a primary reinforcer satisfies a basic need, typically a biological need for survival. Typically with animals, it is food. Food would be the primary reinforcer. So no prior experience is needed for these to be reinforcing. They are just reinforced from birth, and they're reinforced biologically and innately. For instance, if you're very, very thirsty, water would be a great reinforcer. And a treat, food given to your dog, is always the primary reinforcer. Secondary reinforcer is something that we've been taught to value. We were not biologically taught to value, say, money or grades. It is something that we have been trained or taught to, we've learned to value these things. And sometimes we value them because they can get us more of the primary reinforcers. If you have money, you can buy more food, right? If you have more money, you can buy more of the primary stuff you need and want, like water. So sometimes we use tokens for good behavior, and then you can exchange them for candy. And again, money is neutral, but if we've been taught to value money, then it's now a secondary reinforcer. So shaping is how we teach tasks. Almost every task that you know how to do, from driving a car to how to load the dishwasher to how to dance a TikTok dance, all of it has happened through shaping. So what we do is we take very small steps, one at a time, and we chain these small steps together until it becomes one action. So when you were little, your parents had to teach you how to brush your teeth, and they had to teach you every single step of opening the toothpaste and putting it on the toothbrush, and how long do you do this, and rinsing and all of that. Learning how to wash your hands. There's a chart right there. It is, what, 6, 7 steps to fully wash your hands. We don't think of it like that. We wash our hands all the time. And we don't think of every single step in the exact order because we've chained them together, and we now think of it all as one big thing that we're being shaped to do, one big action, one big behavior. But when we first teach you how to write the alphabet, we start with the A, we start with the B, we take it one letter at a time. We are shaping one letter at a time, and now you use the alphabet every day like it's no big deal. So we call this successive approximations. When we're working with animals or working with people, you give a successive approximation. It's a gradual step towards what you want as the desired behavior. So if you want your pigeon to push a button, you have to reward the pigeon when it gets near the button, and then you reward the pigeon when it touches the button. If you were going to teach your dog to ride a skateboard, you have to teach the dog to maybe bring a treat to the skateboard and then touch the skateboard before you can ever put the dog on the skateboard. So that's a successive approximation. We have to teach in gradual steps. We teach you to ride a bike with training wheels and somebody holding you and helping you. And it's a small bike, and then eventually you take the training wheels off, and then nobody's holding you, and then it gets to be a bigger bike. Instinctive drift refers to the fact that animals tend to drift back to their instincts. So if they have an instinctive behavior that interferes with the conditioned response they've been taught, they will tend to drift back if they're not constantly, continuously rewarded, or if you're not always keeping an eye on them. So eventually wolves would go back to trying to kill sheep. Eventually, your dog may stop responding at the dog park if there's too much stimulation, too many other dogs around. Pigs, they've done studies with pigs. They had pigs picking up coins and putting them in a piggy bank, kind of funny, but the pigs actually would revert back to a rooting behavior where they would root in the ground and root the coins up. And so that instinctive drift, they would go back to what their biological behavior was. Raccoons typically wash their food. So they taught raccoons to deposit coins into a slot. But after a while, the raccoons would start to rub the coins together like they were washing them, just like they would wash their food in a stream. So that's what we mean by instinctive drift. We tend to drift back towards our instincts. And now you are ready for the next video.